Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now, Gran Turismo 7 has been updated recently, so that means I have to do my reviews of all the new cars to see if they're worth your time and effort. Now, this review is a little bit different. We got the updated GTR, the facelifted, whatever, Evo version, whatever you want to call it, with update 1.25. So I thought it'd be really cool to go back and compare the new with the old. Obviously, the older version being this one here, almost a decade old at this point, the 2013 GTR. It was in GT Sport. It was in, I believe, started coming in around GT5. So it's been that long that we've had this car in the Gran Turismo series, and we haven't really had a proper updated GT3 model, well, until now. So I thought it'd be really cool to test them both, review them both, and just see, like, is the new one really that improved over the one that's kind of tried and tested and been around for the longest time? So let's go and have a look at the stats. So let's head over to the old version first. This is the Nismo GT3 from 2013, the old GTR model. As you can see, it's 723.81 performance points. It's turboed, weighs 1,300 kilograms. In terms of its max power, it's 591 brake horsepower, almost 600 brake, tons of downforce, huge big wings on it. It looks absolutely stunning, and it comes in at the standard Group 3 price at 450,000 credits. Now, onto the updated version, and in my opinion, this is an absolute looker. Definitely much improved over the looks of the 2013 model. As you can see here, it's got 723.14 performance points. Max power is actually quite a bit less, to be fair, at 576 brake horsepower, so not as close to that 600 barrier, and it does actually weigh less at 1,285 kilograms. Comes in at a bit more expensive at 600,000 credits. So, as always, we're going to take these to the Nurburgring Nordschleife layout, and we're actually going to have the old car up first. This gives us a good indication, sets a benchmark, and then we can test the brand new model and see, well, is it really worthy of that extra 150 grand in terms of credits that you're going to put out, and is it really a worthy improvement in general? Now, in terms of this car, it is an absolute stunning, beautiful GT3 machine, one of my all-time favorites in terms of GT3 cars over the years. I think it's one of the most timeless looking cars. Now, it does feel and actually look quite outdated in terms of today's grid. Obviously, if you look at the more modern updated GT3 cars, this one, it really doesn't kind of fit in anymore. It's something that you probably see in a open GT championship these days, but back in the day, this was a very good performing car. In fact, way back when this car was kind of racing around in the same livery and all that good stuff within the multiple GT championships, I was very much a massive GTR fanboy. And I don't mean in the way that I'd sit and defend it, but I really did like these cars. Like, I was head over heels for them. I thought they were the coolest thing. Obviously not as much today, to be honest. I think it was just like, I was a bit younger, so for me this was like the coolest thing. And while today I still think these are very, very good looking cars, I think they're absolutely awesome. I think for the kind of, the road going version, the fact that they're not ridiculously expensive, but they can beat supercars worth 3 or 4 times the price, is still the coolest thing. Obviously this kind of version of the GTR has been around such a long time at this point. And I don't mean like, yeah, it got facelifted in, I believe, like 2016, 2017. But obviously, in terms of the standard base design for it, it's been around since like, what, 2007? It's been in concept since like 2002. Yeah, so it's a very kind of, I guess, long-running design at this point. That typical GTR look has been around for the longest time, and to be honest, I don't mind it. It's still a car that's worthy of being that supercar killer. It's had many different versions, but we are focusing here on, obviously, the GT3 version. Now, if you've ever seen one of these in real life, it really does kind of look a little bit out of place. Now, what do I mean by that? So what I essentially mean is, if you look at most GT3 cars, even from when this car was still racing and still a main show of the grid, all the other GT cars look very kind of streamlined, proper supercar looks. Whereas I would probably compare this to something like the Bentley GT3. Now, I have seen them both race kind of sort of at the same weekend, and they're both very bulky, very kind of sort of, it's difficult to explain, but they've got this real bulky look to them. They look quite big. They don't look very aerodynamic. I kind of refer to them as the, you know, the brick cars. You know, they don't look like they should be giving out the performance they do. They, in fact, to be quite honest, they don't look like they should be, you know, punching through that air at all. They look like they should be very much off the pace. Now, this GT3 GTR, the you know, the older model, very successful racer. It was absolutely astonishing what this thing could do, especially in terms of its opening pace. There was multiple videos of this thing doing a ridiculous amount of overtakes within opening laps. It was just a very, very good car. It performed well. It did everything that it should have done. It did essentially did Nissan proud in terms of the sort of GT3 racing categories. And if you ever saw one in real life, the sound this thing makes was absolutely insane. Now, it was a very weird sound. So in terms of the actual engine note of this thing, it's rather quite muted, so it's not the loudest thing. However, when this thing exits corners and the traction control is constantly trying to kick in, it will bang, crackle and pop like no tomorrow. I remember sitting in the grandstands at Donington Park when this thing exited the final corner there, and oh my god, did it absolutely shake the stand. You know, obviously it's trying to fight off the traction control, and it was popping and banging like absolute crazy. You know, sadly this model has obviously faded away from the limelight. You will probably not see many of these unless you at a more national event. You may see the odd one, but even then it's usually the more up-to-date model. But honestly, in terms of this car, I really genuinely do like it. So let's talk about it in terms of Gran Turismo 7 and this lap. Now, I jumped in this car not knowing what to expect, so I haven't used it that much, or used it for the longest time in GT7. In fact, probably since the physics were as they were on release, which wasn't too great. So I jumped in this car not really knowing what to expect, not knowing how it would feel. Now, with BOP off, which obviously that's how I run these cars for the time trial, this was probably the best GT3 car in terms of the feeling it gives you. You feel like you are in complete control at all times. It was absolutely amazing. I've honestly never jumped in a Group 3 car and felt so confident straight away with it. And you really do feel confident. You feel like you can absolutely hammer this thing through the corners and it's not just going to break away from you. Now, you may have spotted possibly a few little kind of slips out of corners. Now, that's not really anything to do with it controlling bad, or, you know, I'm absolutely throwing you off, it handles like crap, when it doesn't, to be honest. What it essentially is there's a weird kind of, I'm not going to necessarily call it a gimmick, but when you're kind of on the exit of corners, sometimes this car felt as if it was on ice. Now, it could be anything. It could be the surface we're on, the camera on the road, kind of, you know, anything can kind of affect that. However, I did not get that with the modern version. But it was such a weird little thing, and that's probably the only downside to this car. Apart from that, I could not pick a single thing that just felt wrong about it. It felt very good. It felt constantly planted. It gave me full confidence. And honestly, in terms of buying a GT3 car at 450k, this is definitely one of the better ones that I think or probably even my favorite in terms of that price point and the performance and feeling this car gives. So if we look on the onboard, right, this is obviously a more dated GT3 car. So keep your eye on this, and obviously we'll compare it to the more modern version. And it really does kind of feel quite dated, even in terms of, like, you know, when GT7 was released. If you jumped in this after any other GT3 car, you could tell this was a much older model. So to be honest, that is why I'm quite glad we've got the more updated version, because this one quite lacking. Now, in terms of the sectors, the individual sectors, feel free to check through them and compare them to your own. Overall, we did this in a 6 minutes 42.354, which is actually not really a bad lap, to be honest. In terms of sort of overall lap pace, it's not amazing, but again, I do feel like that's kind of down to this being a more outdated GT3 model. I do feel like the more modern versions could absolutely hammer this thing in terms of outright lap pace. But on our lap time leaderboards, we actually finally have an overall for the first time in what feels like a long time. As you can see, it's just taken the final spot, the 20th spot on our leaderboard, just behind another Group 3 car, which is essentially a GT1 car. So as expected, it's just a little bit slower, but really not by that much. I'm actually fairly impressed that this car has managed to put that time in. So now let's jump into the brand new model, the one that's just come to GT7 with update 1.25, a car which a ton of people are moaning about. However, for me, I absolutely love the GTR, like I said. So for me, it's a worthy addition, and it finally starts updating some of them outdated GT3 cars. Now, can you go and do that with Ferrari, please, Polyphony? Because that Ferrari is insanely old. I would love the up-to-date version of that car. But let's focus on this one here. So, in terms of key differences, what does it feel like? Well, it feels sort of similar, but not quite. It's really weird to kind of, bring the point across. Okay, so this car here, the more modern version, it definitely feels a lot quicker. It feels a lot more aggressive through the corners while still feeling planted. That extra aggression, I feel, can lead to you being more error prone. It's insanely quick with BOP off. It was actually quite surprising. So while it still kind of retains that typical GTR kind of grip feeling, like it never felt to the point where it was just constantly going to snap away from you or anything like that, it felt very aggressive into the corners. No matter how you drive it, it feels like this thing is constantly going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and wants to absolutely attack every corner. And to be honest, the performance is that good in terms of, attacking corners and stuff, that it probably will catch you off guard a few times. As you can see, you're probably going to notice through the lap, sometimes I'm absolutely trying to wrestle this car in and just trying to, sort of not overdo it, because this thing really does launch. It launches through corners, it launches out of corners. I genuinely cannot find a bad point for this car, and it also kind of resolves that feeling of kind of loss of grip on exit of corner. It feels like the downforce is constantly working with you. Now, I'm going to say this, I did have an off on this lap, and I feel like it probably did cost me maybe a second and a half, 2 seconds, but I did manage to keep it going. And as you know, with these reviews, if I have a little off and I manage to keep the car going, well, I'll keep it in, because that is a true proper review. Not everything can be mistake free. Obviously, if the car had spun round, I'd have restarted the lap, but it did keep going, so it is going to be in there. You will probably spot that a little bit later on. And again, that just feels like it was just sort of the performance of the car kind of, catching me off guard. Like, you don't realize how fast this thing is going, and it can either be something that works in your favor or something that works against you. This thing is just honestly a absolute beast, and I really do enjoy using this car, and I think this will probably maybe be my go-to Group 3 now from now on. Obviously, in terms of its performance and how it feels, it just feels like an improvement over the older model. But obviously, if you look at the stats, this thing essentially looks worse on paper than the older version. But honestly, it doesn't feel like that. It felt like it actually had more power. And I feel like, okay, maybe in terms of the stats on paper, it's got less power and it's putting out less of this, less of that. But it just felt like it's being used a lot better. And that's just what I mean. Like, this car just feels like an improvement in every single way over its predecessor. And honestly, just from doing this one lap, it felt like a worthy addition to the game. Now, a lot of people were saying, oh, it's another Skyline, why put in a 2018 model? Well, as far as I know, this kind of base GT3 model has not been updated since then. In fact, I believe it's starting to get kind of pushed out from, I want to say next year by the Z, obviously the new Z car. I believe that will become Nissan's main GT3 car. I'm sure I've heard quite a few rumours about that. So this is essentially Nissan's swan song to the GTR. It never really got any more updates since, and to be honest, in terms of the GT3 scene, I don't feel this version was as popular as the previous version. I feel like when that original, you know, the predecessor to this one came on the scene, there was a ton of them. You know, the GTR was insanely popular, but I feel like when they kind of updated it to this more evolved model, you just never really saw as many of them in the GT3 racing scene. Obviously, you did still see some, but I just felt like outside of Japan and such, it was never really on the level that the predecessor was. But honestly, look, it's a more up-to-date GT3 car, and in my opinion, if they were going to update one of the GT3 cars, it would have been the GTR and the Ferrari. Obviously, we do have sort of more updated versions of like the SLS, which obviously became the AMG GT3 and such, which again, even at this point, is due an upgrade. Obviously, we need the C8 Corvette and stuff, but in terms of going through the original roster of cars that were in there, this is a good pick, and like I said, I really do hope they get onto for the Ferrari next, because that again feels like a model which has just kind of been left behind, and if they put an updated version in, it's really going to kind of, I guess, sort of give people a reason to go to Ferrari. And I think that's what they've essentially done here with Nissan. You know, you don't see many Nissans in sport mode. You probably do at the minute. I actually haven't been in since. I feel like everyone's going to be driving this car. But in terms of actually seeing the Nissans in the Group 3 races, I feel like I've never really seen any in GT7. And probably after the first 6 months of the GT Sport launch, it was pretty rare to see a GTR in, well, almost any lobby. Most people just seem to flood towards the metas these days. So hopefully this does kind of, you know, diversify the grid a little bit. Hopefully we start seeing some more Nissans in sport mode. Obviously, usually when a new GT3 car or Group GT4 car is added, a lot of people will flood towards it for a bit and it will fade out. Hopefully this one doesn't, because I think it's a, you know, a proper looker in terms of the GT3 grid. I always feel like at least one person's got to run the GTR, and that will probably be me from now on, in all honesty. I love the look of this car, I love the sound of it, I love the feel of it, and it's just a really worthy addition. Now, people are probably going to argue that, say, well, no, it's not. Well, you know, think what you want, you're entitled to your own opinion, I completely respect that, but you know, my opinion is that it's a worthy addition, and I am 100% glad to see it in the game. And it lived up to my expectations massively. In fact, it probably outdid them. You know, it felt really awesome to go back to both of these GTRs and then kind of get the feeling that, okay, this is definitely an evolution of the predecessor, which is exactly what I wanted from this GT3. Now, in terms of the, you know, sort of onboard of this car, you can tell it feels a lot more up to date. It feels a lot more racy, whereas the other one kind of feels, still kind of resembles a road car in a weird way. Obviously it doesn't, but it felt kind of, you know, very, very outdated, to be honest. And this just feels like a much more up-to-date cockpit. Obviously the wheels now are essentially the kind of Formula 1 style, I like to call them. So yeah, definitely a worthy update in terms of the interior. So overall, on our individual sectors, we did a 6 minute 37.580, so that is a massive improvement. Obviously, even with that off, I feel like if I hadn't have had that off, I feel like we could have easily got like a 6:35. But is that actually enough to not only knock the previous car off, but is it enough to get rid of that GT1 Aston Martin? Is that going to knock it off its top spot in terms of the Group 3s we have? And it actually is, by around about 2 seconds. So if we hadn't have had that off, this car could possibly have been a good few more seconds ahead of that Aston Martin. It puts it in 19th overall and actually makes it the fastest GT3 Group 3 car that I have tested so far. And in my opinion, with BOP off, there is no other GT3 that feels just quite as good as the brand new Nismo GT3. So overall, which one is the better car? Now, I think for someone that's a lot more confident in driving, the updated model is going to be your go-to. You know, yes, it's very powerful. If you can rein it in, obviously it's not scary to drive at all, but if you can rein that insane power and downforce in and use that to your advantage without making any mistakes, hands down, the 2018 GT3 model is going to be insanely good for you. I feel like this could be many people's go-to car. I don't think there's a GT3 car that feels just quite as good as it. In my honest opinion, I feel like it's a stunning addition, and I really do feel like that is going to be kind of the go-to. I feel like I said, if you had to pick one over the other, I think most people are now going to pick this one because it is a worthy upgrade. It gives out a ton of performance, but I feel like you're going to have the confidence to rein this car in. If you are not as confident, I honestly 100% suggest going for the older model. Yes, it's more bulky. Yes, it's outdated. However, in terms of, you know, being able to just jump in it and have full confidence, this is definitely the go-to model. I feel like anyone can have confidence in this car and do well. But in my opinion, the 2018 model is the better one, and it is a worthy addition to Gran Turismo 7. So that's going to be it for today's video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Turn those notifications on. Turn that bell on. You know, press it so you don't miss an upload from myself. Don't forget to check the Discord out in the description down below. And my sponsor for today's video, the Controller People, for all your custom controller needs. Honestly, I feel like I'm finally enjoying Gran Turismo 7 for really what it is. And I'm beginning to enjoy making content again. I'll catch you all later. Take care, guys. Peace!